Hello and welcome to my driver rankings video for the Austrian Grand Prix that has just finished. Now, it was a slightly better Grand Prix than the Austrian Grand Prix that we had last week, but it still wasn't overly fantastic. Now, this is the series in which you guys, the audience, can get involved, so following that link in the top line of the description, you can submit your driver rankings for each of the drivers this weekend, in order for me to average out all of those ranks to create an overall audience rank to compare to my ranks that we will release today, and then also compare them to my data algorithm that gets released on Tuesday or Wednesday. So with that out of the way, let us jump on into the Austrian Grand Prix driver rankings video, and we'll just quickly stop off at the championships at the moment. It is Max Verstappen who now has a 32-point lead over Lewis Hamilton, a comfortable victory margin. And Valtteri Bottas is still down in P5, with Lando Norris just 3 points behind Sergio Perez for P3 in the Drivers' Championship, not the Constructors' Championship, Christ. The two Ferraris are just separated by 2 points, with Ricciardo on 40. With the Constructors' Championship, Red Bull pulling away only just by, I think it was about 4 points or so. Their lead now 44 points overall, with McLaren 101 back from Mercedes and edging a little bit further away from Ferrari. There is then a super close battle between AlphaTauri and Aston Martin, with Alpine in a sort of middle group on their own, and then Alfa Romeo on 2, and Haas and Williams on none. And now we will take a look at the Audience Prediction Championships for the Austrian Grand Prix, and then we'll take a look at the season scores as well. So the best predictor for the Austrian Grand Prix was Joshua, scoring 18 out of 25. Then we had Elita and Andre 13 scoring 7. Elliott scores himself 16 as well. And then where is myself on that list? I don't even really appear on that list. There I am in the bottom left, joint on 12 with a Doctor Who channel. And current championship leader Evan Darcy had a bad prediction. I say bad, this is their worst one that they've had so far. They are not appearing in that top table. We also have a new entry of Chewbacca, also joint on 12. Love a good Star Wars reference, I do, with the second half of the table for the Austrian Grand Prix entries looking a little bit like this. Now, totaling up all of the races that we have had so far, we end up with an overall leaderboard with 120 plus entries, looking something like this. Evan Darcy comfortably ahead of Joe Bischoff, though the gap has come down. It is now 10 points. It was just above. Myself and a Doctor Who channel still joint overall. We're joint on 114, and Danielle B and Arturo Salazar joined the 100 points club, with Hal just being 3 points away. 6 points away for both Alan and Min Verstappen as well, with Tom Sayer on 92. We then have people like Matej, Archie, Het, Joshua Ritteraj, and Leroy, of course. With the second season's total table looking a little bit like this, with people ranging from 55 all the way down to 21, with the third season's table looking a little bit like this, with Mika Tukkinen on 21 all the way down to Val on 11, with the final table looking like this. Andrew Lee scoring 11, and then Nick, T07, and F scoring 2. Now, to make it fair to those people who have not entered into every single race like myself and a couple of the top runners, I've created a second table which averages out your score for the races that you have entered. And that table looks a little bit like this. We have Schlank at the top on 16 out of 25 overall for their entries that they have made. Then we've got Edvin Sevona, who I think this was their first entry that they have made so far. Then we've got current championship leader Evan Darcy on 14.6 out of 25 for these first 9 races. Compared to my average and also a Doctor Who channel's average, who is again the same on 12.7. So if you see yourself high up in this leaderboard, then you know you are doing a very good job with your predictions. So look at Leroy, entered less races than myself, but has a higher average by just 0.5 of a point. With the second table looking a little bit like this, we've got a range from 12.0 down to 10.0. We have a bunch of people on 10 and also a bunch of people on 11 as well. With the third table looking a little bit like this, with 10 down to 8. And then finally, the table looks a little bit like this. And there we go, there is the end of the Audience Prediction Championship score roundup. If you would like to get involved in the Audience Prediction Championships, make sure to check out the videos that I drop on the Thursday before the F1 Grand Prix weekend, in which I drop my predictions, and that is then exactly how you can get involved in this championship. But now what we're going to do is we're going to be ranking each of the drivers for their Austrian Grand Prix and also taking into account the rest of the weekend. So we'll be taking a look at qualifying too. Now I'm going to be scoring them out of 20, 20 being the best possible weekend that they could have ever had, and then 1 being the worst weekend that they possibly could have had. And that is going to be exactly the same for you guys in the description down below if you follow that link. We are going in 2020 Constructors' Championship order, so we start with the 2 Mercedes and we'll end with the 2 Williams drivers. And Mr. Lewis Hamilton scores 12 out of 20. Now I realise he had damage on his car, and I realise he was running in P2 at the time. Whether he would have held the P2, who knows, but he was running P2 at the time of the damage. However, it was just a sort of frustrating weekend for Mercedes in general. Their car just wasn't really working. They were finally out-qualified by a customer team on raw pace. So perhaps I could bump this up to 13, but I really don't want to be giving much more than that, as I don't think this weekend really deserved it. Whereas Valtteri Bottas, he scores himself a 15 out of 20 overall. It was an qualifying. Qualifying really let down the 2 Mercedes, both of them, equally. Whereas the race, Bottas actually put in some exceptional race manoeuvres. And he ended up P2 overall, but again, that was sort of due to the McLaren penalty, as I'm not sure if he'd have had the race pace to compete with Norris. Otherwise, Norris would have comfortably come out ahead in the pit stop phases, and I don't know whether Bottas would have been able to get past. So perhaps if Norris didn't have his penalty, P3 would have been the maximum for Bottas, in which case his score would have been a little bit lower. But 15 out of 20 is Bottas's score. And then we take a look at Max Verstappen. It is the second race in a row that he has scored 20 out of 20. It was a Grand Slam weekend. He led every single lap. He even had the chance to pit an extra time at the end of the Grand Prix and still won by over 10 seconds. He got pole position, only just, but still pole position. And this was his first ever Grand Slam and also getting the fastest lap bonus point as well. So as far as perfect weekends go, this was it. You couldn't have asked for any more. And then from Max Verstappen's 20 out of 20, we'll take a look at Sergio Perez. 12 out of 20, the same as Lewis Hamilton. It was an eventful weekend and an eventful race for Sergio Perez. Qualifying was very, very good, being half a second off of Max Verstappen in Q1 and in Q2, as well as being literally nowhere in all 3 of the practice sessions to turn it around and be 2.5 tenths down in Q3 and then faster than both of the Mercedes. That was a good qualifying. However, the race, he was just caught up in all of the incidents, and that just hampered his race so much. And ultimately, with the 2 combined 5-second penalties for pretty much the same incidents with Charles Leclerc, he ended up being demoted from P5 on track down to P6. So a little bit of a scrappy weekend for Sergio Perez, and he scores himself 12 out of 20. And moving on into McLaren, we'll take a look at Daniel Ricciardo, 13 out of 20. A much better weekend for Daniel Ricciardo. In terms of race pace only, qualifying was still a little bit iffy for the Australian, being knocked out in Q2 once again and having a very, very significant teammate gap to Lando Norris. But the race was very good, holding on to P6 until a late charge from Carlos Sainz, and he managed to get past the McLaren driver. But yeah, a much better weekend for Daniel Ricciardo, and he scores himself 13 out of 20. Whereas Lando Norris, his teammate, 18 out of 20. An exceptional weekend. P2 was easily on the cards. Had he not had that 5-second penalty with Perez going round the outside and Norris just... Do I want to say forcing him off the track? Because then Perez did exactly the same thing twice to Charles Leclerc. It is what it is. It's a penalty in Lando Norris's favour. I was about to say it's a racing incident. Clearly not. But 18 out of 20 for Lando Norris. But then moving away from the 2 McLarens, and we'll take a look at Sebastian Vettel in the Aston Martin. 10 out of 20. Qualifying has brought this up a little bit. Their race pace, I thought they were going to have some race pace, but it just didn't exist. didn't exist for either of them. And at the time where he crashed with Kimi Raikkonen right at the end of the Grand Prix, in which I don't really know if there was anyone too much to blame for that. If anything, it looked like a lapse in Kimi Raikkonen's concentration more than Sebastian Vettel's. But he was outside of the points. He was down in, I think it was like P13 or P14 at the time. Difficult weekend. 10 out of 20. And for Lance Stroll, an even more difficult weekend. Qualifying is just odd because they were the only ones that got through to Q3 on the soft compound of tyre, which sort of boosted everybody's confidence and belief in Aston Martin, and then the race pace went backwards. 8 out of 20 for Lance Stroll, and he was going to finish behind Sebastian Vettel had Kimi Raikkonen and Sebastian not come together. But then moving away from the Aston Martins, and we'll take a look at the Alpines. 14 out of 20 for Fernando Alonso, and coincidentally for car number 14. Qualifying was going to be exceptional had there not been that massive hold-up at turn 9 and turn 10, which wasn't really caused by Sebastian Vettel, but Sebastian Vettel was the root cause of Fernando Alonso having to sort of slow down and abort his lap overall. But again, that's just a whole other kettle of fish. The race was again exceptional. That battle with Lando Norris right at the end, very similar to what we had last week, where there was just that last little gaspy battle at the end between Perez and Bottas that just sort of injected a little bit of life into the Grand Prix. So 14 out of 20 is Fernando Alonso's score. Whereas Esteban Ocon scores an 8. I've had to be a little bit sort of on the... what's the word I'm looking for? On the side of... What the heck is that word? Benefit of the doubt. That was it. Not on the side of anything. Benefit of the doubt. Now, I'm going to give Ocon the benefit of the doubt for this one because we have no idea what would have happened in the race. It could have been another stinker, like it was last week, much like his qualifying made us believe. But we'll never know. We'll absolutely never know, as he was dinked out in lap number 1, just sort of part of a sandwich. Yes, he could have come off the throttle. Yes, he could have braked and avoided it, but it's racing. It's a lap 1 incident overall, so we'll never know what would have happened with Esteban Ocon. And then from the Alpines, we'll take a look at the Ferraris. 12 out of 20 for Charles Leclerc. Just, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about Leclerc. When you see where Sainz placed, and obviously Leclerc was involved in the incidents with Sergio Perez, I feel there was just a little bit more to come. So perhaps there could have been some floor damage, having gone on the gravel twice overall, and actually on 2 different sides of the car. I think it would have been 2 different sides of the car. I'd have to quickly rewatch it, but definitely going onto the gravel twice isn't ideal. Qualifying was a little bit of a mess. They tried to get through on the medium compound of tyre, which would have just benefited them so much in the Grand Prix. And I feel there could have been just a little bit more from Charles Leclerc. Whereas his teammate Carlos Sainz ends up with a 16 out of 20 for my driver rankings. Again, the qualifying just wasn't quite there, but that's because they were trying to favour themselves for the Grand Prix. And in the Grand Prix, he put in a mega final stint to close that gap to Sergio Perez right at the end to within 10 seconds to claim that P5 spot. Absolutely exceptional, and without a doubt, had there not been those incidents with Charles Leclerc, he'd have been up there too, and Leclerc would have got a slightly better score. Then moving away from the Ferraris, we'll take a look at the AlphaTauris. 10 out of 20 for Pierre Gasly. He went backwards. It's as simple as that. He went backwards. Qualifying was very good. P6, P7 sort of range, and then he's just a couple of positions behind in the Grand Prix. Nothing else really happened. He was very pushy and very challenging in the first opening stages of the race, which was awesome to see. And that was it. Whereas his teammate Yuki Tsunoda, 8. For pretty much the same reasons, but worse than Pierre Gasly. Started very well, and went backwards and backwards and backwards and backwards, and out of the points. So not a particularly great weekend for Yuki Tsunoda when he had a decent weekend last week. And then from the AlphaTauris, we'll take a look at the Alfa Romeos. Kimi Raikkonen, 10 out of 20. Split him in the middle because it was a average weekend. Perhaps 8. Perhaps even 7. I'm going to give him a 7. So it is a 7 overall for Mr. Kimi Raikkonen. Qualifying It's not his strong suit, clearly. However, he does perform very well in the Grand Prix. He makes up a lot of places and he puts himself in very decent positions, except when it comes to Sebastian Vettel and an Aston Martin, and they punt each other off. 7 out of 20 for Kimi Raikkonen. Then moving to his teammate Antonio Giovinazzi, also 7 out of 20. I'm going to bump this down to a 6 because he can't be scoring the same as Raikkonen when he did worse. It's almost the sort of flip for Antonio Giovinazzi. His qualifying is very good, and then his race is not very good. And at the time of the Kimi Raikkonen-Sebastian Vettel incident, he was just in front of Latifi, and that was it. Which isn't very ideal whatsoever. So 6 out of 20 for Antonio Giovinazzi. And then from Giovinazzi, we'll take a look at Mick Schumacher. 9 out of 20. I can see why lots of people would rate him less than 9 out of 20, because he was 30 seconds off of Nicholas Latifi, but I can see why a lot of people would rate him a lot higher than 9 out of 20, because he was 50 seconds ahead of Nikita Mazepin at the checkered flag. But, splitting the difference, I've given him a 9. And then talking of Nikita Eggbrain, 2. Crap. Enough said. Then from Nikita Mazepin, we'll take a look at George Russell. 16 out of 20. Qualifying, exceptional. Finally through to Q3. On pace, on the medium tyre, faster than the two Ferraris, on the medium tyre. And then in the Grand Prix, so very close to points once again. I think there was only 3 seconds odd in it at the end of the checkered flag to Fernando Alonso. And an exceptional battle with Fernando Alonso right at the very end. His points will come in that Williams. They have the pace. They have the pace. Maybe at Silverstone it may not be as close because it may not suit their car as much. But definitely there are, 14 races still left of this season. We're about 2/3 or a third of the way through. There's a lot more races and a lot more opportunities for George Russell. And then finally, Nicholas Latifi, 7. He did nothing. Again, it's Nicholas Latifi in the race. Nothing really ever happens. Which is really disappointing for Nicholas Latifi, as he is such a nice bloke. But his race pace just isn't, it's just not there. It just doesn't exist. He doesn't seem to have much race pace. And there we go, there are my driver rankings all done and dusted for this week's Austrian Grand Prix. And finally, this triple header is all done and dusted. I am knackered from making all of these videos, but we'll do it all again in 2 weeks' time for the British Grand Prix. Now, please let me know in the comments below whether you agree or even disagree, which you probably will, with my rankings, and then make sure to submit your own using that link in the top line of the description. And then also let me know where you're placed in the Audience Prediction Championships. I would absolutely love to know. But that is all I've got for you today, guys. I hope you have enjoyed, and I will catch you in the next episode with whatever and whenever I decide to make it. I'll see you guys then.